You've been told that creating your ideal future requires years of struggle, complex planning, and endless action steps. But what if I told you that quantum entanglement holds the key to collapsing your desired timeline directly into your present moment? What if the very fabric of reality is designed to respond instantly to a specific type of coherent intention that most people never learn to access? Here's what's really happening. Every single moment you're entangled with infinite versions of yourself across parallel timelines. Right now there's a version of you living your dream life, another version struggling with different challenges, and countless variations in between. Quantum entanglement isn't just some abstract physics concept happening in laboratories. It's the fundamental mechanism through which your consciousness connects with and selects which timeline becomes your experienced reality. The billion-dollar manifestation industry has convinced you that creating change requires complex rituals, endless visualizations, and years of patient waiting. They've sold you courses on vision boards, affirmations, and action planning because complexity keeps you buying. But quantum entanglement reveals something revolutionary. Your future self already exists in a parallel timeline, and through the principle of quantum entanglement, you can establish an instantaneous connection that begins collapsing that timeline into your current experience. Think about this for a moment. In quantum physics, when two particles become entangled, measuring one instantly affects the other, regardless of the distance separating them. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance because it seemed to violate everything we thought we knew about how reality works. But decades of research have proven that entanglement is real, measurable, and fundamental to how the universe operates at its deepest level. Now here's where it gets fascinating for your life. Your consciousness isn't separate from quantum mechanics. Your brain operates through quantum processes, and your awareness exists in what physicists call the quantum field, the underlying energetic matrix from which all possibilities emerge. When you understand how to work with entanglement principles, you can create instantaneous connections with the version of yourself who has already achieved what you desire. Let me share what really happened when I first discovered this. I was struggling with a business that was barely surviving, working 18-hour days, following all the traditional success advice, and getting nowhere fast. Then I learned about quantum entanglement from a physicist friend who was studying consciousness research. He explained that every decision creates a branching point where multiple timelines split off, each containing a different version of your life playing out. The breakthrough came when I realized I didn't need to create my success from scratch. Somewhere in the quantum field, there was already a version of me running a thriving business, living in abundance, and experiencing the freedom I craved. Instead of trying to build toward that future, I could use entanglement principles to connect with that timeline and allow it to collapse into my present reality. Within 3 weeks of applying these principles, opportunities started appearing that I couldn't have planned or predicted. A client I'd never met called offering exactly the project I needed. A business partner reached out with a collaboration that doubled my income overnight. People started describing me differently, as if I was radiating a completely different energy. My external world was reorganizing itself to match the timeline I had entangled with. But here's what most people miss about quantum entanglement and timeline collapse. It's not about visualization or positive thinking. It's about achieving what physicists call quantum coherence with your desired timeline. Coherence means your thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and energy signature are all aligned and broadcasting the same frequency. When you achieve coherence with a specific timeline, the universe has no choice but to begin collapsing that reality into your experience. Think of it like tuning into a radio station. Right now, thousands of radio signals are passing through the space around you, but you only hear the station you're tuned to. Similarly, infinite timelines exist simultaneously in the quantum field, but you only experience the one you're coherently entangled with. Most people are broadcasting mixed signals, wanting success but believing it's difficult, desiring love but expecting disappointment, seeking abundance but feeling unworthy. These mixed signals create quantum decoherence, which keeps you stuck in timelines that match your conflicted energy. The secret that quantum physicists understand but rarely share publicly is that consciousness is the deciding factor in which quantum possibilities become reality. The famous double-slit experiment proved that the mere act of conscious observation determines whether light behaves as a wave of infinite possibilities or collapses into a specific particle reality. Your consciousness is constantly collapsing quantum possibilities into your experience timeline, but most people do this unconsciously, creating more of what they've always had. When you learn to consciously entangle with your ideal timeline, something extraordinary happens. You begin experiencing what I call timeline bleed-through. Elements from your desired future start appearing in your present moment before the full timeline has collapsed. You might suddenly know exactly what to say in a crucial conversation, receive unexpected opportunities that align perfectly with your goals, or find yourself in the right place at the right time with increasing frequency. Sarah, one of my clients, experienced this when she was trying to transition from her corporate job to becoming a full-time artist. Instead of creating a 5-year plan and gradually building her art business, she used entanglement principles to connect with the timeline where she was already a successful artist. Within 2 months, she was invited to showcase her work at a gallery opening she'd never heard of, sold 3 pieces to collectors who became ongoing clients, and received a commission that covered 6 months of her expenses. Her future timeline was bleeding through into her present reality. The science behind this is profound. Quantum field theory tells us that all possibilities exist simultaneously in what's called the zero-point field, a sea of infinite potential that underlies physical reality. Your consciousness acts as both an observer and a broadcaster, constantly selecting which possibilities become your experienced reality. When you achieve coherent entanglement with a specific timeline, you're essentially sending a clear signal to the quantum field about which reality you want to experience. But here's where most manifestation teachings get it wrong. They focus on trying to attract things to you from outside yourself, as if you're separate from what you desire. Quantum entanglement reveals that you and your ideal future are already connected at the deepest level of reality. You're not trying to create something new. You're allowing something that already exists to become your experienced timeline. This is why traditional goal setting often feels like pushing against resistance. You're trying to force a new reality into existence instead of aligning with one that's already available. When you work with entanglement principles, manifestation feels effortless because you're working with the natural flow of quantum mechanics rather than against it. Let me tell you about the moment I truly understood this. I was meditating on a business breakthrough I needed, but instead of visualizing or affirming, I simply asked to connect with the version of myself who had already solved this challenge. Suddenly, I felt a distinct shift in my energy, as if I was accessing a different frequency of myself. Ideas began flowing that I knew weren't coming from my current level of thinking. I could feel the confidence and clarity of my future self bleeding through into my present awareness. The next day, I found myself taking actions I'd never considered before, speaking with an authority I'd never felt, and making decisions from a place of knowing rather than hoping. Within a week, the breakthrough I'd been seeking for months materialized in a way I couldn't have planned. I realized I hadn't created something new. I had simply allowed my entanglement with a more successful timeline to reorganize my present reality. This is what quantum entanglement power really means. It's the ability to consciously connect with and embody the energy signature of your ideal timeline until that reality becomes your lived experience. Your future self exists right now in the quantum field, and through the principles of entanglement, you can establish an instantaneous connection that begins collapsing that timeline into your present moment. The reason this works so powerfully is that time isn't linear at the quantum level. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously in what physicists call the eternal now. Your future self is as real and accessible as your past self, and through quantum entanglement, you can draw wisdom, energy, and guidance from any timeline that exists in the quantum field. Think about those moments in your life when everything flowed perfectly, when opportunities appeared effortlessly, when you felt completely aligned with your path. In those moments, you were naturally entangled with a timeline that matched your highest potential. You weren't trying to force anything. You were simply in coherence with a reality that wanted to express itself through you. Most people experience this kind of flow randomly, then spend years trying to recreate it through effort and strategy. But when you understand quantum entanglement principles, you can access this state intentionally. You can learn to tune into the frequency of your ideal timeline and maintain coherence with it until that reality becomes your new normal. The first step is understanding what I call your quantum signature. Every timeline has a unique energy signature, a specific combination of thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and states of being that define that reality. Your current timeline has a signature that matches your current life experience. Your ideal timeline has a completely different signature that matches the reality you want to live. To entangle with your desired timeline, you need to identify and embody its quantum signature. This isn't about pretending or visualizing. It's about actually becoming coherent with the energy of that reality. When you achieve true coherence, you'll feel a distinct shift in your being, as if you've stepped into a different version of yourself. Marcus discovered this when he was struggling with financial limitations despite working incredibly hard. He realized that his current timeline was characterized by effort, struggle, and the belief that money was scarce. His ideal timeline, where he lived in abundance, had a completely different signature characterized by ease, flow, and the knowing that resources always appeared when needed. Instead of trying to work harder or make more money, Marcus focused on embodying the quantum signature of his abundant timeline. He practiced feeling the ease and confidence of his financially free future self. Within days, he noticed his relationship with money beginning to shift. Opportunities started appearing that he'd never seen before, even though they'd probably been there all along. His perception was changing because he was entangling with a timeline where abundance was natural and expected. This is the power of quantum entanglement for timeline collapse. You're not trying to change your external circumstances through force or manipulation. You're changing your internal coherence to match a timeline where those circumstances are already your reality. The external world then reorganizes itself to match your new quantum signature. But here's what you need to understand about maintaining entanglement with your desired timeline. Your current reality will try to pull you back into your old quantum signature through doubt, fear, and the familiar patterns that created your current timeline. This is what physicists call quantum decoherence, when your clear signal becomes mixed with conflicting frequencies. The key to successful timeline collapse is learning to maintain coherence even when your external reality hasn't fully shifted yet. This requires what I call quantum faith, the ability to trust your entanglement with your desired timeline even when your current circumstances seem to contradict it. Jennifer experienced this challenge when she was using entanglement principles to transition into her dream career as a wellness coach. She had achieved clear coherence with the timeline where she was successful and fulfilled, but her current reality still showed an empty bank account and no clients. Her mind kept trying to pull her back into worry and doubt, which would have broken her entanglement with her desired timeline. Instead of giving in to the fear, Jennifer learned to recognize these moments as temporary quantum static, interference that was natural during the timeline collapse process. She maintained her coherence with her successful future self, continuing to think, feel, and act from that energy signature, even when her external circumstances hadn't caught up yet. Within 6 weeks, her reality had completely transformed. Clients began appearing through unexpected referrals, opportunities opened up that she couldn't have predicted, and her income surpassed what she'd been making in her corporate job. Her desired timeline had successfully collapsed into her present reality because she'd maintained coherent entanglement throughout the transition period. This is where quantum entanglement becomes a practical tool for life transformation. You're working with the fundamental structure of reality itself, the principle that consciousness and quantum possibilities are intimately connected. When you achieve coherent entanglement with your desired timeline, you're not hoping or wishing for change. You're actively participating in the quantum process that determines which reality you experience. The beautiful thing about this approach is that it works with your natural quantum nature rather than against it. You don't need to force, struggle, or overcome resistance. You simply need to learn how to tune into the timeline you want to experience and maintain coherence with its quantum signature until that reality becomes your lived experience. So here's what I want you to consider right now. What if the future you've been working toward already exists in the quantum field? What if your ideal timeline is already playing out in a parallel reality, just waiting for you to establish coherent entanglement with it? What if the gap between your current reality and your dreams isn't about time or effort, but simply about quantum coherence? Where in your life are you trying to force change instead of allowing entanglement with a timeline where that change has already occurred? What would it feel like to embody the quantum signature of your ideal future right now, in this moment? If you're starting to feel that spark of recognition, that sense that something profound is shifting in your understanding, hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started with quantum entanglement power. There's so much more to explore about how your consciousness can work with quantum mechanics to collapse your ideal timeline into your present reality. But before we go deeper into the specific techniques for achieving timeline entanglement, I need to share something that most quantum physicists won't tell you publicly. There's a reason why this information isn't taught in schools or shared in mainstream success programs. The implications of conscious timeline collapse are so profound that they threaten entire industries built on keeping you believing that change is slow, difficult, and requires external permission or validation. The truth is, there are forces that profit from your limitation. Think about it. If everyone understood that they could instantly entangle with their ideal timeline and collapse it into reality, what would happen to the industries built on selling you slow, incremental change? What would happen to the systems that depend on you believing you need their permission, their products, their lengthy programs to transform your life? This is why quantum entanglement for timeline collapse isn't taught in universities, despite being supported by decades of peer-reviewed research. It's why manifestation courses focus on vision boards and affirmations instead of the actual quantum mechanics of reality creation. They need you to believe that transformation takes time, effort, and their guidance, because instant timeline collapse would make their business models obsolete. But here's what they can't hide from you anymore. The research is public. The quantum field studies are available. The consciousness experiments proving that observation collapses quantum possibilities into reality are documented in scientific journals. The only reason you haven't been taught to use these principles is because your empowerment threatens systems that profit from your limitation. Dr. Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences has conducted thousands of experiments proving that consciousness directly influences quantum systems. The Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory spent decades documenting how human intention affects random quantum generators. The Global Consciousness Project has shown that collective human awareness can influence quantum randomness on a planetary scale. The science is there, but it's buried under layers of academic complexity that keep it away from practical application. Let me tell you what happened when I first presented these concepts at a manifestation conference. I was scheduled to speak about quantum timeline collapse, but 20 minutes before my presentation, the organizers asked me to focus on more practical techniques instead. They were concerned that teaching people how to instantly access their ideal timelines would make the other speakers' lengthy programs seem unnecessary. That's when I realized the manifestation industry has the same problem as every other industry. It needs customers, not graduates. It needs people who keep seeking, not people who find. Teaching you that your ideal timeline already exists and can be accessed through quantum entanglement would graduate you from being a perpetual seeker to being an empowered creator. And empowered creators don't need to keep buying courses about how to become empowered. So let's talk about what really happens when you achieve coherent entanglement with your ideal timeline. The first thing you'll notice is what I call reality fluidity. Your external world starts responding to your internal shifts with a speed that seems almost magical. Conversations flow in directions that serve your highest good. Opportunities appear that align perfectly with your desired timeline. People start treating you differently, as if you're radiating a completely new energy signature. This happens because you're no longer broadcasting the quantum signature of limitation, struggle, or incompleteness. You're embodying the coherent frequency of your ideal timeline, and the quantum field is responding by collapsing that reality into your experience. Remember, the quantum field doesn't distinguish between your current timeline and your desired timeline. It simply responds to whichever frequency you're broadcasting most coherently. David experienced this when he was trying to find his ideal romantic partner. He'd been single for 3 years despite trying every dating strategy, working on his self-worth and following all the relationship advice he could find. Then he learned about quantum entanglement and realized he was approaching it backward. Instead of trying to attract someone to his current timeline of being single and seeking, he needed to entangle with the timeline where he was already in his ideal relationship. The shift was subtle, but profound. Instead of embodying the energy of someone looking for love, David began embodying the energy of someone who was already loved, cherished, and in a fulfilling partnership. He wasn't pretending or visualizing. He was actually accessing the quantum signature of the timeline, where his ideal relationship already existed. Within 2 weeks, he met Sarah at a coffee shop he'd been going to for months, but had never seen her there before. Their connection was immediate and natural, as if they'd been waiting to find each other. Later, they discovered that Sarah had been going to that same coffee shop for over a year, usually at the same time David was there, but somehow their paths had never crossed until he shifted into coherence with his partnered timeline. This isn't coincidence. This is quantum entanglement in action. When David changed his quantum signature, he began existing in a timeline where meeting his ideal partner was natural and inevitable. The external circumstances reorganize themselves to match his new coherent frequency. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Timeline entanglement doesn't just affect future events. It can actually influence what appears to be your past. I know this sounds impossible from a linear time perspective, but quantum mechanics reveals that time isn't the fixed, forward-moving river we've been taught to believe it is. In quantum physics, there's a phenomenon called retrocausality, where future events can influence past conditions. When you achieve coherent entanglement with your ideal timeline, you're not just changing your future. You're actually shifting into a timeline where the past events that led to your current moment are different. This is why people often experience what feels like reality glitches during timeline collapse periods. Lisa discovered this when she was working with timeline entanglement to heal a difficult relationship with her mother. She had achieved coherence with a timeline where they had a loving, supportive connection, but her current reality was filled with years of conflict and misunderstanding. As she maintained entanglement with the healed timeline, something extraordinary happened. Her mother called one day and said something she'd never said before. She apologized for not being more supportive and expressed how proud she was of Lisa's accomplishments. But here's the strange part. Lisa's mother referenced conversations and moments of connection that Lisa didn't remember having. It was as if her mother was remembering a different version of their relationship history, one that aligned with the healed timeline Lisa had been entangling with. Over the following weeks, other family members began relating to Lisa differently, as if the family dynamics had shifted not just going forward, but retroactively. Old wounds seemed to have healed in ways that transcended the linear time explanation. Lisa realized she hadn't just changed her future relationship with her mother. She had shifted into a timeline where their relationship had evolved differently from the beginning. This is the profound power of quantum entanglement for timeline collapse. You're not just changing what happens next. You're stepping into a completely different version of your life story, one where the conditions for your ideal reality have always been present, even if they weren't activated until you achieved coherent entanglement. Now, let me share the specific process for identifying and entangling with your ideal timeline. The first step is what I call quantum archaeology. You need to excavate the exact quantum signature of the timeline you want to experience. This isn't about vague wishes or general goals. You need to identify the precise thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and energy states that characterize your ideal reality. Start by asking yourself this question. In the timeline where you're living your ideal life, what is your relationship with uncertainty? Most people in limitation timelines fear uncertainty and try to control outcomes. But in abundance timelines, uncertainty is exciting because it represents infinite possibilities for good things to emerge. Your future self, who has everything you desire, isn't worried about how things will work out. They know that the quantum field is always conspiring to support their highest good. What is your relationship with time in your ideal timeline? People in struggle timelines feel like they're running out of time, like they're behind, like they need to hurry. But in your ideal timeline, you have a completely different relationship with time. You know that everything unfolds in perfect timing, that you're always exactly where you need to be, that the universe operates on a schedule that serves your highest good, even when you can't see the bigger picture. How do you make decisions in your ideal timeline? In limitation timelines, decisions are difficult because you're afraid of making the wrong choice. But your ideal timeline self makes decisions from a place of knowing rather than hoping. You trust your intuition completely because you understand that your higher wisdom is always guiding you toward experiences that serve your growth and joy. These aren't just philosophical differences. These are quantum signatures, specific frequency patterns that determine which timeline you experience. When you embody the quantum signature of your ideal timeline, you begin broadcasting a coherent signal that the quantum field must respond to by collapsing that reality into your experience. The second step is what I call coherence cultivation. This is where you practice maintaining the quantum signature of your ideal timeline, even when your current circumstances seem to contradict it. Most people can access their desired frequency for a few minutes during meditation or visualization, but then they return to their default signature the moment they encounter challenge or uncertainty. Coherence cultivation means learning to maintain your ideal timeline frequency throughout your daily life, especially during moments of stress, confusion, or apparent setback. This is when your entanglement with your desired timeline is most crucial, because these are the moments when the quantum field is most responsive to your coherent intention. Remember, The quantum field doesn't care about your current circumstances. It only responds to your coherent frequency. If you can maintain the quantum signature of abundance while your bank account appears empty, the field must respond by collapsing abundance into your experience. If you can maintain the frequency of perfect health while your body appears to be struggling, the field must respond by collapsing healing into your reality. This isn't positive thinking or denial. This is quantum mechanics. You're working with a fundamental principle that consciousness determines which quantum possibilities become reality. Your coherent entanglement with your ideal timeline is a quantum instruction to the field about which reality you choose to experience. Michael learned this when he was facing what appeared to be a business failure. His company was losing money, clients were leaving, and everything seemed to be falling apart. Traditional thinking would have had him focus on damage control and crisis management. But Michael understood quantum entanglement principles. Instead of entangling with the timeline of business failure, he maintained coherence with the timeline where his company was thriving and successful. This didn't mean ignoring the challenges or pretending they weren't happening. It meant addressing them from the quantum signature of his successful timeline, rather than from the frequency of fear and limitation. He made decisions from the place of knowing that his business was fundamentally sound and valuable, even when external evidence suggested otherwise. The turnaround was remarkable. Within 6 weeks, new opportunities emerged that not only saved his business but expanded it beyond what he'd previously imagined possible. A competitor offered to partner with him on a project that doubled his revenue. A client he'd thought was lost returned with a contract 3 times larger than their original agreement. His business didn't just recover, it transformed into something much more aligned with his highest vision. Michael realized that what had appeared to be a crisis was actually the quantum field clearing away elements that weren't aligned with his ideal timeline. The challenges weren't obstacles to his success, they were the universe reorganizing his reality to match his coherent entanglement with his thriving business timeline. This brings us to one of the most important aspects of quantum entanglement for timeline collapse. What looks like problems in your current reality are often the quantum field dismantling structures that aren't compatible with your ideal timeline. When you maintain coherent entanglement with your desired reality, everything that doesn't match that frequency begins to dissolve or transform. This is why timeline collapse periods can feel chaotic or uncertain. Your old reality is dissolving, while your new reality is still forming. The key is to trust the process and maintain your coherent entanglement even when you can't see how things will work out. The quantum field is infinitely more intelligent than your linear mind, and it's orchestrating changes that serve your highest good in ways you couldn't plan or predict. Think about a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly. There's a stage in the chrysalis where the caterpillar's body completely dissolves into what scientists call imaginal soup. From the outside, it looks like destruction, but it's actually the most creative moment in the transformation process. The caterpillar's old form must dissolve completely before the butterfly's new form can emerge. Timeline collapse works similarly. Your old reality must dissolve before your new reality can fully manifest. The key is maintaining faith in your transformation even during the imaginal soup phase when everything seems uncertain and chaotic. So let me ask you this. Where in your life are you experiencing what seems like chaos or dissolution? What if these aren't problems to be solved, but signs that your old timeline is dissolving to make space for your ideal reality to emerge? What if your willingness to maintain coherent entanglement during uncertain times is exactly what allows your desired timeline to collapse into your experience? Here's something else that most people don't understand about quantum entanglement and timeline collapse. Your ideal timeline isn't just about getting what you want. It's about becoming who you really are. Every timeline represents a different version of your consciousness expressing itself through physical reality. Your ideal timeline is the one where your highest potential is fully activated and expressed. This is why timeline entanglement feels so natural when you achieve it. You're not trying to become someone else or create something foreign to your nature. You're simply allowing your fullest expression to emerge by entangling with the timeline where that expression is already activated. When you understand this, manifestation stops being about acquisition and becomes about authentic self-expression. You're not trying to get things from outside yourself. You're allowing the timeline where your authentic nature is fully expressed to become your lived reality. Drop one word in the comments that captures how you're feeling about this quantum entanglement approach to timeline collapse. Are you starting to sense that your ideal future might be more accessible than you've been taught to believe? But here's where we need to address the biggest obstacle most people face when working with quantum entanglement for timeline collapse. It's not doubt or fear, though those can certainly interfere. The biggest obstacle is what I call timeline addiction. You've become so identified with your current timeline that part of you is afraid to let it go, even though it's not serving your highest good. Your current timeline, no matter how challenging, is familiar. Your nervous system knows how to navigate it. Your identity is built around it. Even if you consciously want to change, part of you is terrified of losing the known reality you've spent years learning to survive. This is why many people sabotage their own manifestation efforts just as they're about to break through. It's not because they don't want success. It's because success would require releasing their familiar timeline and stepping into an unknown version of reality. Their system chooses familiar limitation over unfamiliar expansion. Rachel experienced this when she was on the verge of her biggest business breakthrough. She had achieved coherent entanglement with a timeline where her company was generating 7 figures annually, and external opportunities were aligning perfectly with that reality. But as success became imminent, she found herself making decisions that undermined her progress. She realized that part of her identity was built around being the underdog, the one who had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Success would mean releasing that identity and stepping into a timeline where she was recognized as a leader and expert in her field. Even though she consciously wanted this, her nervous system was terrified of losing the familiar struggle identity she'd spent years developing. The breakthrough came when Rachel understood that timeline entanglement wasn't about losing herself. It was about finding herself more fully. The version of her that was successful and recognized wasn't a different person. It was simply her authentic nature expressing itself without the limitations she'd accepted in her current timeline. Once she realized this, she could release her attachment to her struggle identity and fully embrace entanglement with her successful timeline. Within 3 months, her business had transformed beyond what she'd previously thought possible, and she discovered that success felt completely natural and authentic to who she really was. This is why quantum entanglement for timeline collapse is ultimately about coming home to yourself. You're not trying to become someone else. You're allowing yourself to exist in the timeline where your authentic nature is fully expressed and supported by reality itself. What aspects of your current timeline feel so familiar that you might be afraid to release them, even though they're limiting your full expression? Where are you choosing familiar limitation over unfamiliar expansion? The next crucial element of timeline entanglement is understanding what I call quantum momentum. Once you achieve initial coherence with your ideal timeline, the collapse process begins accelerating exponentially. Small shifts create larger shifts, which create even larger transformations, until your entire reality has reorganized itself around your new quantum signature. This is because the quantum field operates on coherence principles. The more coherently you broadcast a specific frequency, the more powerfully the field responds by collapsing that reality into your experience. Your initial entanglement with your ideal timeline creates momentum that builds upon itself, making each subsequent shift easier and more natural. But here's what you need to know about quantum momentum. It works in both directions. If you maintain coherent entanglement with limitation, struggle, and lack, that timeline will also accelerate and become more entrenched in your experience. This is why some people seem to attract more and more challenges as they focus on what's wrong with their lives. The key is recognizing that you're always entangled with some timeline. The question isn't whether you're using quantum entanglement. The question is which timeline you're coherently entangled with. Every moment you're either strengthening your connection to your current reality or building momentum toward your ideal timeline. This is why consistency in your quantum signature is so important. It's not enough to access your ideal timeline frequency occasionally. You need to make it your default setting, your natural way of being in the world. When your ideal timeline signature becomes automatic, the collapse process accelerates dramatically because you're no longer sending mixed signals to the quantum field. This brings us to what I call the quantum tipping point. There's a specific moment in every timeline collapse process where your new reality becomes more real to you than your old one. It's the moment when maintaining your ideal timeline frequency requires no effort because it's become your natural state of being. Most people give up just before reaching this tipping point because the process can feel challenging right beforehand. Your old timeline makes one final attempt to pull you back into familiar limitation. Unexpected obstacles appear. Doubt intensifies. People around you might even resist your transformation because your changing frequency is challenging their own timeline attachments. But here's what's really happening during this phase. The quantum field is testing the strength of your entanglement with your ideal timeline. It's presenting you with opportunities to choose your new reality over your old patterns. Every time you maintain coherence with your desired timeline, despite external pressure to revert, you're strengthening your quantum entanglement and accelerating the collapse process. Thomas experienced this when he was transitioning from employee to entrepreneur. He had achieved strong coherence with his successful business owner timeline, and opportunities were emerging that supported this reality. But just as he was about to make the leap, everything seemed to go wrong. His current job became more demanding. His savings were depleted by unexpected expenses, and well-meaning friends questioned his decision to leave security for uncertainty. The old Thomas would have interpreted these challenges as signs that he should abandon his entrepreneurial dreams and stay in his familiar employee timeline. But understanding quantum entanglement principles, he recognized this as the tipping point phase. His old timeline was making a final attempt to maintain its hold on his reality. Instead of reverting to limitation, Thomas used each challenge as an opportunity to strengthen his entanglement with his entrepreneur timeline. When his job became more demanding, he maintained the energy signature of someone whose time was valuable and whose talents deserved better compensation. When expenses arose, he embodied the frequency of someone who always had access to the resources he needed. When friends expressed doubt, he responded from the knowing confidence of his successful future self. Within 6 weeks of passing through this tipping point phase, Thomas's reality had completely transformed. A client offered him a contract that paid more than his annual salary. His employer, sensing his shift in energy, offered him a consulting arrangement that provided security while he built his business. The friends who had doubted him began asking for his advice about starting their own ventures. The tipping point had been reached. Thomas's entrepreneur timeline had become more real than his employee timeline, and the quantum field responded by collapsing his new reality into full manifestation. This is why understanding the phases of timeline collapse is so crucial. When you know that challenges often intensify right before breakthrough, you can navigate them with confidence instead of interpreting them as evidence that your process isn't working. Here's another key principle that accelerates timeline entanglement. Your ideal timeline isn't just about you. It's about the highest good of everyone whose life intersects with yours. When you entangle with a timeline that serves not just your individual desires but the collective evolution of consciousness, the universe provides exponentially more support for your transformation. This doesn't mean sacrificing your dreams for others. It means recognizing that your authentic self-expression and the fulfillment of your highest potential serves everyone around you. When you're living from your ideal timeline, you inspire others to access their own highest possibilities. Your transformation gives others permission to transform. Maria discovered this when she was hesitant to fully embrace her healing gifts because she was afraid of standing out or being judged. She had achieved coherence with a timeline where she was helping hundreds of people heal trauma and reclaim their power, but part of her felt selfish for wanting recognition and financial abundance through her work. The breakthrough came when she realized that her ideal timeline wasn't just about her success. It was about creating a reality where healing and transformation were accessible, valued, and celebrated. By fully embodying her healer timeline, she was contributing to a collective shift toward wellness and empowerment. Once Maria aligned with this bigger purpose, her entanglement with her ideal timeline became unshakable. She wasn't just manifesting for herself, she was serving the evolution of consciousness itself. Within months, her practice had grown beyond her previous dreams, but more importantly, she was witnessing profound transformations in her clients that rippled out to affect their families, communities, and professional environments. This is the ultimate power of quantum entanglement for timeline collapse. When your ideal timeline serves the highest good of all, you're working with the fundamental evolutionary impulse of the universe itself. Your transformation becomes part of a larger pattern of awakening and expansion that's happening across all levels of reality. So as we prepare to dive even deeper into the practical applications of these principles, I want you to consider this. What if your ideal timeline isn't just a personal fantasy, but an actual contribution to the evolution of human consciousness? What if your willingness to entangle with and embody your highest potential is exactly what the world needs right now? What would change in your approach to timeline collapse if you knew that your transformation was serving something much larger than your individual desires? How would it feel to know that your success, abundance, and authentic self-expression were gifts to the collective awakening of humanity? If these questions are stirring something deep within you, if you're starting to sense the profound responsibility and opportunity of conscious timeline collapse, then you're ready for what comes next. because we're about to explore the specific techniques that will allow you to achieve stable, coherent entanglement with your ideal timeline and maintain it until that reality becomes your permanent experience. But first, there's something crucial you need to understand about the relationship between quantum entanglement and what most people call intuition. Your intuitive guidance isn't separate from timeline collapse. It's actually your higher consciousness communicating information from your ideal timeline back to your current awareness. Your intuition is literally your ideal timeline self, sending you quantum information about the path of least resistance toward your desired reality. Every intuitive hit, every sudden knowing, every moment of perfect clarity is your future self communicating backwards through quantum entanglement to guide your present moment choices. This is why following your intuition often leads to outcomes that seem miraculous from a linear perspective. You're not just making good guesses. You're receiving direct guidance from the version of yourself who has already navigated the path you're currently walking. Your ideal timeline self knows exactly which choices will accelerate your timeline collapse and which ones will create unnecessary delays or complications. The problem is, most people have been conditioned to trust external authority over internal knowing. They've been taught that logic and analysis are more reliable than intuitive guidance. But quantum entanglement reveals that your intuition is actually the most sophisticated navigation system available to you. It's quantum intelligence operating beyond the limitations of linear thinking. When you learn to trust and follow your intuitive guidance consistently, you're essentially allowing your ideal timeline self to navigate your current reality. Every inspired action you take strengthens your entanglement with your desired timeline and accelerates the collapse process. This is why people who follow their intuition seem to live charmed lives where everything flows effortlessly. They're not lucky. They're simply allowing their ideal timeline to guide their present moment choices, creating a direct path between where they are and where they want to be. So here's what I want you to understand as we bring this exploration together. Quantum entanglement for timeline collapse isn't just a manifestation technique. It's a fundamental shift in how you relate to reality itself. You're moving from the illusion of separation and limitation into the truth of your infinite creative potential. Your ideal timeline already exists. Your future self is already living the reality you desire. Through the principles of quantum entanglement, you can establish conscious connection with that timeline and allow it to collapse into your present experience. This isn't wishful thinking or positive psychology. This is quantum mechanics applied to conscious reality creation. The only question remaining is whether you're ready to release your attachment to limitation and step into the timeline where your highest potential is fully expressed. Are you ready to trust that the universe is designed to support your expansion rather than test your endurance? Are you ready to believe that your dreams exist because they're meant to be lived? The quantum field is responding to your coherent intention in every moment. Your consciousness is constantly collapsing infinite possibilities into your experienced reality. The power to transform your life completely already exists within you. You just need to learn how to use it consciously and consistently. If you're feeling that deep recognition, that sense that everything you've been seeking has been seeking you just as intensely, then you're ready to begin working with these principles immediately. Your ideal timeline is calling to you through every desire, every vision, every moment of knowing that there's more available to you than what you're currently experiencing. The universe is waiting for you to claim your power as a conscious creator. Your future self is waiting for you to establish the quantum entanglement that will collapse your dreams into reality. The only thing standing between you and your ideal timeline is your willingness to believe that it's not only possible, but inevitable, once you align with the quantum principles that govern reality itself. The time for waiting is over. The time for limitation is complete. Your ideal timeline is ready to become your lived reality the moment you achieve coherent entanglement with its quantum signature. Everything you've ever wanted is already yours in the quantum field, just waiting for your consciousness to collapse it into your present moment experience. This is your invitation to step into the most powerful creative force in the universe, your own quantum entangled consciousness, working in perfect harmony with the infinite intelligence of the quantum field to manifest the reality your soul came here to live.